Alright, before anything, I want to ask a question. Something for you to think about in your noggin before I really get into everything. What color is this dress? This series has expanded further past what I intended, and that is completely fine, because now it has led me to this video. This video is probably going to be the most important video I will ever make, and I'm going to fire a few shots on the way.
The Myers-Briggs stuff is based on junk science. It's not even real science. People keep believing, I'm an INFTP. I don't even know the types,
sure.
Right? We never studied this stuff in grad school because it's all junk.
All of typology has a really bad flaw in it.
The probability that they will use the test is inversely related to the accuracy of the test, which basically means that the less accurate tests are easier to sell. And you think, well, why the hell would that be? How in the world would it possibly be that corporations would rather buy tests that don't work than tests that do work?
For a moment, hypothetically, I want you to pretend that this value of the number 2 is wrong. Now you may be wondering, that's impossible. 2 is 2. It's a representation of a quantity of something. It can't be wrong or off. But can you imagine if it was?
I just read some old Carl Jung book about personality types, and I bet us two unqualified nobodies could do a better job.
Yes, let's do some science or whatever. Let's create an influential test that will be widely used for decades.
And so these two writers, who had no scientific training, took theories from one of Carl Jung's non-scientific books and came up with their list of personality types.
Ooh, my friend Carrie is...
Can you imagine all the problems in mathematics that would occur if that value of the number 2 didn't actually represent the actual quantity and that something somewhere was off? Well, guess what? There was a similar situation happening in real life. In 2019, the science community decided to move the kilogram to a mathematical constant. Do you know where the kilogram was based on before? It was based on the IPK, the International Prototype Kilogram, which was a literal chunk of metal stored in the International Bureau of Weights and Measures in France. Why did they change it? Well, this special piece of metal was actually losing mass over time, despite being in a specialized case and locked in a specialized vault. It lost about 50 micrograms, which is about the amount of a grain of sand. Can you imagine the amount of problems this would create if you were uncertain about any of your conclusions and all of your projections would be wrong because of such? It's kind of like how when Dionysius Exiguus created the AD calendar, he didn't have all the facts or information, and so he estimated a little bit. So our entire calendar is a little off. That's a fun fact. I'm dramatizing a little bit. In everyday life, the IPK doesn't mean much, but in large-scale measurements, like the speed of light and the distance between planets, to small-scale measurements, like atoms and electrons, this uncertainty about a specific value can be problematic, so they decided to change it to this. Now, how do these stories relate to typology?
MBTI has been widely criticized as pseudoscience. MBTI isn't very valid. That is, it doesn't have much predictive power. You can't take someone's MBTI type and predict what they might do in a given situation. The system is also not very reliable. It gives different results for the same person at different times. If Carl Jung was right that personality was like left or right-handedness, this wouldn't happen. But my MBTI type describes me perfectly, you say.
Personality is theoretically infinite, and emotions and behaviors are squishy and don't have to make sense. Any emotion can become any emotion, and any behavior can become any behavior, depending on the individual and circumstance. The reason I mention the IPK is that if you don't have a stable point of reference to base personality on, your entire system is going to be wrong, no matter how complex or logical or sound the system may be, because all of your conclusions will be wrong. Logic without stable variables is just a glorified opinion. Why is it that there are so many different MBTI systems within the MBTI community? You have C.S. Joseph and his 4 sides of the mind, Cognitive Personality and his 16 cognitive function model, OPS and their 512 typing model. There's a 64 cognitive function model by Eric Thor where he includes subtypes. This doesn't even include the rest of the popular MBTI YouTubers that exist in the community. Frank James, Joyce Mang, Dear Kristen, Love Who, Amy Y, and many more. These are all YouTubers I personally watched to try to understand the functions better, but all of them articulated them differently, producing a different interpretation, producing a different result. I had to sift through so many videos to try to narrow down what the functions meant. Heck, even the main MBTI test on the 16 Personality website is rejected by its own community as inaccurate because the questions are slanted. Do you know how problematic that is? Because there isn't a stable point of reference to base typology around, well, it become anything you choose it to be, as long as the system sounds logical. Which system is right? Is it yours? For example, this is why I heavily dislike the Enneagram. The Enneagram tries to put all of human behavior into 9 different archetypes, and then base personality around that. If the core philosophy of the Enneagram is to basically amalgamate human behavior into different archetypes, what is the difference then between the Enneagram and the alpha male personality model? There isn't. It's just based on stereotypes. And likewise, what's the difference between MBTI and the alpha male model if you don't have a stable point to base it off of? What Typology has done is that instead of going from the inner mind to outer experience, they went from outer experience to understand the inner mind. They've aggregated personality traits into different archetypes through observation and stereotypes, and then codified and assumed it as accurate. And I don't blame them. What other way is there? It's one of the flaws of psychology in general. But I recognize that this process of creating a personality system off of the aggregation of stereotypical behaviors is problematic because personality is infinite. The reasoning behind why people have certain beliefs and choose specific options doesn't automatically translate to behavior. You can gauge how beliefs translate towards certain behaviors. It doesn't work in reverse. It's a lot harder to gauge how certain behaviors translate towards beliefs. And look, I'm not an anti-typologist. I wouldn't even be making this video if I was, because I wouldn't bother wasting my time with it. I even have my own model that I'm trying to sift through with the color theory. You see this graphic here? I made this to try to separate the different layers the brain tries to process simultaneously. It's also been massively helpful in being able to switch vantage points between large-scale processing in the conscious layers and microprocessing in the bottom layers. For example, the way we define the word beliefs or ego is different up here in the conscious layers than it is down here in the instinctual layers. And even then, this is still an oversimplification of how psychology works. The reason I mention this graphic is because typology has another problem. They aren't considered scientific, and psychologists and behavioral scientists try to avoid it.
The only problem is that this test is completely meaningless. Clinical psychologists, psychiatrists, anyone working to understand human behavior who doesn't have a stake in the financial success of this test doesn't actually even believe in it. The really strange thing is that there are leading psychologists on their board, and none of them use the test in their personal research. You know, in 2012, Carl Thorson, a Stanford psychologist and board member of CPP, admitted that it would be questioned by his academic colleagues if he actually used the Myers-Briggs in his research.
Why is that? Well, remember the question at the beginning of the video. Is the dress black and blue or white and gold? Is it possible that your personality can shift the direction of which one you see? This question is happening down in the abstract to instinctual layers. Psychologists spend their time trying to figure out and analyze why this difference happens. Typologists don't. And that is fine. However, when it comes to the dynamic between how the brain processes information and personality, you have to try to also include all of this information as well. It can't be a side note or a footnote. There has to be a connection somewhere. For example, the Booba-Kiki effect is where individuals will attach sounds to certain shapes. Booba is perceived as rounder and Kiki is perceived as sharper. But this goes deeper. Rounder is perceived as softer. Sharper can be perceived as tougher. Softer is perceived as feminine. Tougher is perceived as masculine. We associate feminine qualities with certain types of attributes and behaviors, and we associate masculine qualities with certain types of attributes and behaviors. And lo and behold, we now have a connection between the Booba-Kiki effect and personality. Why is it that way? Well, that's a good question. Why is it that way? The point of it is that you may not actually get to answer the question, but you still have to consider the ramifications and the possibility of its existence. However, this is why this detail about how the ego, based on the core emotions, attaches meanings together to create FI values is so important, and why this is my most important video I will ever do. Every individual is going to have an ego, and it's going to be based around the instinctual levels of and the instinctual emotions of pain and pleasure. This is instinctual, meaning it's universal. Everyone can understand this. This example of attaching meaning to meaning is simple and basic enough to where everyone can experience it. This process is done by dopamine, attaching data points together and then preventing them from separating. This is based on science. And thus, the process of attaching this meaning to that meaning to create FI values is a universal experience that everyone deals with, meaning everyone can relate to it. This detail combines science, philosophy, and typology into one event. This process right here is the core, stable reference point that you can officially start basing a personality system around. And it's this type of thinking that I try to run my color theory through to verify its accuracy. Being able to feel this and understand this is how I was able to isolate the different emotional valences that each color has. So, for the first time, instead of using external metrics and stereotypes to understand behavior, going outwards to in, you now have a starting point to understand your own thinking and emotional pathways to go inwards to out that everyone can relate to, and then you can build something from there. Oh boy, man, I have been holding this thought in for years. Talk about therapeutic. Anyway guys, thanks for watching, and thank you guys for tuning in so far. Keep being awesome, and on to the next video. Don't forget to like and subscribe.